Good evening, Dr. Bhatnagar, sir.
Good evening.
Sir, I'm Dr. Madhulika, sir, from pediatric surgery final year resident from Nilofer Hospital.
Okay.
I'll be presenting the case today, sir.
Good. So you are a final year student, is it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. So, you see, before you start presenting, I'd like to tell you that there are two aspects to presenting a case.
Sir.
One is an academic exercise where you have a problem and you want to solve it solve that problem, very much like a police investigation, right?
Yes, sir.
So you have certain information, and based on that information, you have to reach a conclusion or a diagnosis in this case. The other aspect of a case discussion is that the way you would like to present it in an examination, for example, right? So there are slightly two different aspects to it. I mean, both are not absolutely identical, but largely they are identical. So in an examination, I think the best thing is that, I mean, for one, you know that you are under stress, and that is what makes all the difference. So one good idea at an examination is that please don't ask your colleagues to tell you the diagnosis of the case that you're going to present.
Yes, sir.
Right? But here, of course, you know everything. And so I think let us begin with your case.
Yes. Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening,
Narendra
Dr.
here.
Good evening.
So, shall I start, sir, or we'll wait?
Well,
Now the time is
Sir,
it's 8, 2 minutes are there.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Sir, now you are in that university, medical college is attached to that?
yes. So this is Sharda University, and the medical college there is known as School of Medical Sciences and Research.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm professor of pediatric surgery in the medical college,
Sir.
but I'm also dean research for the medical wing. The medical wing has 4 institutions: the medical college, the dental college, the nurses college, and the College for Applied Health Sciences. So I look after the research aspects of all these 4 institutions, in addition to my practice as pediatric surgeon.
Okay. How many medical students that takes?
So at the moment, they're not running a course in pediatric surgery, but they have a postgraduate course in general surgery, where they take 11 PGs every year. And they have a very robust undergraduate program. So at the moment, they have 150 students per batch, but it's very soon going to become 250 students per batch.
Oh, that's great.
So I do case discussions with the general surgery PGs, and I have some demonstrations and lectures for the undergraduates. And the pediatric surgery is done as a super specialty subject at the moment, so which is not part of the undergraduate curriculum. So it is essentially more like a corporate practice for pediatric surgery.
Who else is there, sir, along with you?
At the moment, I'm alone.
Okay.
But Dr. Ravi Kale, I don't know whether you know him.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. So General Ravi Kale is heading one unit in general surgery. So very often I pass on some my pediatric surgery cases to him as well, when I'm either not in the mood to operate, or whether I don't have the facility or something or the other. So I mean, he's very good to have him there, because when I'm in trouble, at least I know that I have somebody to fall back on.
Yeah, that's true. I think now it is 8 o'clock, sir. We can start.
Yes.
Madhulika.
Yes, sir.
You can start.
So before Madhulika starts, let me give you a kind of a small warning that in Noida, the electricity connections and the internet connections are slightly dodgy. So in case if there's a problem in between, I might have to log in again. So please bear with me.
Sure.
Good evening, everybody attending today's session hosted by Institute of Child Nelofer Hospital, Hyderabad. We are very happy to welcome Professor Dr. Vireshwar Bhatnagar, sir, for today's meet. Sir has completed his MBBS and MS and as well MCH from AIIMS, New Delhi. And so, sir was former professor and head in pediatric surgery in AIIMS. He is a faculty member in pediatric surgery until 2018. And sir has done his medical fellow in hepatobiliary and liver transplant surgery at King's College Hospital, London. And he's a visiting professor in pediatric surgery at Bahrain. Sir has various accolades to his name, few of them being more than 270 research works and publications and 1,996 citations.
Wow, I didn't know that. So you must have done your homework.
Yeah, it was there in pub, sir.
That's great,
sir. Medical. Gayatri, a 3-year-old female child, Hindu by religion, coming from Asif Nagar, Hyderabad, whose informant was the mother and whose reliability is fair, came with
let me interrupt you. Oh. Is it necessary to talk about religion?
Actually, no, sir.
So, why I'm saying that is because some people, take it amiss. I mean, they don't want religion and things of that kind to be mixed up in a scientific case presentation. Okay. So I think it's probably better in terms of social sensitivities to not talk about religion.
Yes, sir.
Because I don't think in pediatric surgery we have any disease conditions which are known to be restricted to or more common in a particular religion. So I don't think it really matters.
Yes, sir. The child had chief complaints of pain abdomen for 4 months. So this child came to us with an acute attack of pain, but the child was, right now she is with us for the follow-up. So I'm presenting the case as she initially presented to us.
Okay.
There was complaint of pain in the upper abdomen on the right side, which gradually the intensity progressed. So 1 second.
Yeah, Madhulika.
Okay. So can you see the full screen?
Yes, you can see.
Go ahead.
Gradually, the pain intensity progressed. The pain was present on and off, and the type of pain could not be specified by the child. There's no aggravating factors. The pain relieved on oral medication, and there is no relation to change in posture. There is no radiation of pain. This pain persisted for 1 week. There's history of vomitings, 4 to 5 episodes, which was non-projectile and non-bilious. Vomiters had no blood, and it was not related to any food intake. This was present for 5 days. This history of high-grade fever with rigors. The fever was intermittent. It decreases on medication, but does not touch the baseline. There is no history of evening rise of temperature. There is history of yellowish discoloration of the sclera, which was noticed on and off. There is history of loss of appetite. There is no history of blackish discoloration of stools. There's no history of bleeding from any injection sites. No history of any abdominal distension or fullness. No history of blood transfusions, constipation, or seizures. Past history. There is history of admission for the similar complaints 1 month back. She was treated with antibiotics. The discharge summary did not mention the name of the antibiotic, but she was discharged with oral antibiotics, cefixime and paracetamol for 1 week course. Antenatal history. She was born from a non-consanguineous marriage with perinatal history, birth order 2. She was delivered by LSC cesarean section at term. She cried immediately after birth and her birth weight was 2.9 kgs. There is no history of any phototherapy or NICU admissions. She is immunized up to date and her drug history has antibiotics and supplements, and the family history is not significant.
So can you give us a little more detail about the antenatal history? Did the mother have the normal ultrasounds and things?
Yes, the mother had normal ultrasounds. She had no fever, unexplained fever, and she was booked and immunized.
No. So the thing is that, I mean, for pediatric surgeons, I think the details of the prenatal ultrasounds becomes very important because there are lots of conditions which can be picked up during the antenatal period itself.
Yes, sir.
So I mean, normally a woman would have at least 3 ultrasounds during the course of the pregnancy. So it is important for us to know what was seen in the prenatal ultrasounds 1, 2, and 3.
Yes, sir.
Do you have that information?
No, sir. She said they did not say her anything specific with the ultrasounds, and the child was born healthy.
Okay. But remember that, I mean, this is a very important part of the history.
Yes, sir. We'll ask for any specific findings in the ultrasound, antenatal.
Yeah. So let us not go to general examination. Let's stay on the history, and let us see what we can figure out from the history.
To summarize, at the end of the history, 3-year-old female child with chief complaints of pain abdomen for 4 months with the yellowish discoloration of eyes, passing dark colored urine along with non-bilious vomiting and high-grade fever.
Yeah. And this happened twice.
This happened twice, sir. Yes. Once she was admitted outside.
And so let's go back to the earlier slides. Let's not see the photographs just now. Yeah. So let's go back to your first slide on the history. Yeah. So now, based on the history, you see the whole purpose. What is the purpose of a history? The history should be taken in such a way that you get enough information so as to guide your examination, your physical examination.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
So if you can develop some sort of an idea as to what the case is all about, you will know exactly what to look for in the examination. Okay?
Yes, sir.
So let us go take the presentation step by step. What do you think about the pain abdomen? What do you think about the vomiting? What do you think about the fever? And what do you think about the yellowish discoloration?
Sir, the pain, I feel the pathology is in the right upper quadrant.
Okay.
And it would have been a type of colicky pain because it was relieving on oral medication also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And by vomitings, I would say that because there is no, it is a non-bilious vomiting. It belongs to, it doesn't belong to the upper GIT. I mean, it is there's some obstruction which is below the.
Can it be reflex? Can it be reflex related?
Reflex causing irritation, yes, sir.
Yeah.
And there is a high-grade fever, which means she's in an infective stage.
Let's not say infective. Let us say inflammation.
Inflammatory stage, and it's a high-grade fever with rigor.
Yeah.
Which does not.
So, I mean, inflammatory state can be because of infection, can be because not because of infection, right?
Yes, sir.
So, what are the kind of fevers which you would see in inflammatory conditions, with or without infection?
Inflammatory condition, there will be a moderate to high-grade fever, sir.
Mm-hmm. So, what would a high-grade fever with rigors tell you? A high-grade fever with rigors will generally happen in an inflammatory state with infection, because of infection. Okay? When you have an inflammation without infection, the fever is usually not high-grade. And there are usually no rigors.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And the yellow discoloration?
Yellowish discoloration, it feels there is an obstruction to the bile passage, sir. Causing accumulation of bilirubin, and hence there is a yellowish discoloration of sclera, but it is on and off, so I feel it is somewhere incomplete obstruction, sir.
So what are the other causes of jaundice? I mean, suppose I say that the jaundice is not because of obstruction to bile flow. Can you still have jaundice?
Jaundice can be even because of medical issues, sir.
Yeah.
It can be infective causes because of bacterial or any toxic or viral. It can be because of any metabolic defects. It can be because of any toxic compounds or IV hyperalimentation.
Yeah. So can jaundice be associated with non-hepatobiliary conditions? The child is a little old for that, but just for theoretical knowledge, jaundice can be associated with
any
hypertrophic pyloric stenosis.
Sir?
Hypertrophic pyloric stenosis.
Yes, sir. When there is an enterohepatic circulation, yes, sir. Pyloric stenosis, any intestinal obstructions, when there is ileus.
Yeah. So, but here in this condition, when you summarize, when you look at this page and you pick up the main aspects of the history, what does that tell you?
There's an inflammatory pathology.
Yeah.
Which is causing jaundice.
Yes, and location?
Location is in the right upper quadrant, sir. Right hyper quadrant.
Yeah. Now, suppose you had this case in the anicteric phase.
Yes, sir.
What would you have thought?
I would have it depends, sir. Even if it is an anicteric stage, I would have seen, if at all, I can see any visible mass in the right hypochondrium.
Okay.
Depending on that, I will decide what it could be.
Yeah, but mass comes in the examination aspect.
Yes,
I'm
sir.
talking only in terms of history. Suppose this girl presented to you with just pain, abdomen, history of fever, and no jaundice. What would you have thought of?
I would think of hepatitis, sir.
Any gallbladder?
Cholecystitis, I can think of, sir.
Okay. What else?
Any gallstones can cause.
Okay. What else?
Any helminthes.
We're talking of pain, fever, and pain and fever, right? Upper abdominal pain with fever. You can still have problems in the hepatobiliary system. How would a liver abscess present?
Yes. It presents with pain and high-grade fever liver. Yes, sir.
Isn't it?
Go with Ribus.
So always the whole idea is that you should always keep your mind open.
Yes, sir.
And think of all possibilities so that you can then rule them out one by one. What else? I mean, it's something which is at the moment, let's say it's theoretical, but it can happen. Suppose, can you have this kind of a feature in appendicitis?
Yes, sir. In a pulled up cecum,
yes.
Can be pain in the upper abdomen.
So if the cecum is in the right upper quadrant, subhepatic,
yes, sir.
The appendicitis could also present like this.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
So it's very important to keep in mind all the possibilities.
Yes,
but
sir.
Here, when you have the added problem of jaundice,
yes, sir.
of icterus, then your choice of possibilities narrows down to most probably the hepatobiliary tract.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Now, this is what you gain right from the beginning by asking the history. In view of the fact that you are now thinking that it could be a condition in the hepatobiliary system, is there something more that you would like to ask in the history? See, so again, you have to, go back and figure out and ask yourself, what are the other possibilities? And when you think of the other possibilities, you ask leading questions for those possibilities, and so that you can either stay with them and look and take the case forward and look for them, or you can say that this is not possible, so let us not waste time looking at these aspects.
Yes, sir.
So, so we were discussing the differential diagnosis.
Yes, sir.
In the differential diagnosis, we had also thought that upper abdominal pain could be because of liver abscesses.
Yes, sir. It can be pancreas also.
Yeah, but you said that it is a non-radiating pain.
Yes, sir.
And so, the characteristics of the pain do not fit in with a pancreatic pathology.
Yes, sir.
But it does fit in with an infective inflammatory pathology in the liver.
Yes, sir.
Right? Now, a liver abscess or an infected hydrated cyst can also present in similar fashion. They can also have a jaundice depending on whether the abscess cavity is compressing upon a major biliary duct.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
So what else would you ask in order to say that this could be or this can't be?
This can't be what? Sorry.
So, we are thinking of by looking at the three main aspects, the pain abdomen in the right upper quadrant, the fever and the jaundice, right? We've narrowed down our possibilities. How do you further narrow down the possibilities?
So the infection has been subsiding with the antibiotics, sir.
Okay.
And only after stopping the antibiotic, the pain and jaundice recurred back.
Okay. So now it is important for us to know what exactly happened in the previous episode.
In the previous episode of admission, sir?
Yeah.
Yeah, she was treated for 5 days in...
No, treatment is different. I mean, what did she present with? You see, you must have some idea about what happened to her in the previous episode. So that if the same things that happened in the previous episode as they're happening now, you have a much clearer picture in your mind as to what this case can be.
Yes. So she did not have vomiting, sir, but she did have a similar kind of pain. She had, the mother said that icterus came on and off, yellowish discoloration came on and off, and there was fever. This was the presentation. Because the temperature was not coming down with paracetamol, they had taken to the hospitals.
Okay. So does this help you in any way? Does the knowledge of the previous episode help you in any way?
Yes, sir. It definitely says that it is a chronic pathology which is getting infected, and it is subsiding with antibiotics and relapsing once it is stopped.
Yeah. So will you call it chronic?
Not chronic, sir, but
it is episodic.
Yes, sir.
Episodic is different from chronicity.
Yes, sir.
Isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Episodic means that something happens, she's fine after that.
Yes, sir.
Then the same thing happens again.
Yes,
right?
Sir.
So that is episodic. A chronic condition generally remains.
Yes,
you know, I mean, it may decrease or increase as and when it happens, but usually the chronicity is something which is not, which does not produce with an acute situation like this, but it kind of lingers on with slightly lower kind of things. She would not have been absolutely fine in between.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So now, having narrowed down to these possibilities, before we go to the examination, can you give me a list of differential diagnoses which you would think of based only on the history?
Can be a choledocholitis. It can be a choledochal cyst with cholangitis. Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, carry on.
Carry on.
Yes, sir. It can be cholelithiasis. Cholelithiasis, cholecystitis, liver abscess.
Sir told liver abscess.
Yes, sir. Liver abscess.
Mm-hmm.
Any extrinsic compressions causing stasis infection?
Any growth, retroperitoneal tumors.
Yeah, retroperitoneal tumors would be away from the biliary system, isn't it? For something to have an effect on the biliary system, it has to be in the region of the biliary system.
When they lift the liver bed, they can cause compression over the
portal lesions.
Yes, sir.
The lesions in the region of the porta.
Okay, so the issue is that you must keep that in mind.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that is why when you are faced with a situation where you can narrow down your possibilities to a particular region or to a particular aspect of pathology, you will know exactly what to look for when you are examining the child.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so now let us go to the examination. And that is where the the history of antenatal sonography helps.
Sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
So, because in a situation like this, if the ultrasound had been done and if the ultrasound had been done by a proper person,
yes, sir,
then they might have detected the possibility of a dilated biliary system or a cyst in the region of the porta hepatis or something.
Yes, sir.
And that would have helped you in making your diagnosis more certain.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
On inspection, the abdomen is normal, umbilicus is inverted, there is no visible dilated veins, ecchymosis, no scars or sinuses, the flanks are free, and the hernial orifice are also free. The external genitalia is normal. On palpation, the abdomen is soft.
Oh, so you had mentioned something in the history, which I said we'll talk about when you're talking about examination. You had mentioned about a visible mass.
Yes, sir.
So that will happen in the inspection, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
So when you see a visible mass, it is part of inspection.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So it wasn't there.
There was no mass, sir. There was no visible mass or palpable mass.
Okay.
The abdomen is soft.
What else? What else? What else do you look for when you're looking at the abdomen in inspection?
I look for any visible mass, visible mass.
No? And that we discussed. Yes, see, the region of interest that we have determined on the basis of history is the right upper quadrant.
Yes, sir.
So what would happen if there is an inflammation in the right upper quadrant, particularly if it is subdiaphragmatic, or if the liver is inflamed? What happens to the abdomen during respiration?
There will be redness and fullness, sir, and the
movement with respiration.
Yes, sir.
So what would you?
The other quadrant.
Yeah, so that's part of inspection, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
So I mean, it's a good idea that when you have an abdominal case, you should have a blueprint kind of thing of what all to look for.
Yes, sir.
Don't let the examiner ask you, why haven't you looked for that? Why haven't you looked for that?
Yes, sir.
Isn't it?
Yes, sir.
I mean, the thing is that the questions which will be asked to you would be much less if you said everything.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes,
so what kind of thing you might expect if there is an inflammatory pathology in the abdomen, in the upper abdomen?
Usually the abdominal, all the quadrants move equally with respiration, sir, but here there will be an asynchrony, sir.
Yeah. Right? So that is something which you must ask, which you must look for and tell it without being asked.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Carry on.
On palpation, the abdomen is soft. There's local rise of temperature in the right hypochondrium, and tenderness was present. There's no organomegaly, and there are no palpable mass.
Okay.
Now on percussion, there is no shifting dullness, and the liver span is 7 centimeter. On auscultation, the bowel sounds are heard and no bruit heard. Systemic examination was normal. Conclude 3-year-old female child with chief complaints of pain abdomen for 4 months, yellowish discoloration of eyes and dark colored urine with non-bilious vomiting with high-grade fever. On examination, child is with tenderness in the right hypochondrium with no palpable mass. My provisional diagnosis would be choledochal cyst with cholangitis.
Why?
Sir, because of the recurrent attacks, and in this age group, she's a female child, sir, and in this age group, it is common. And the other possibilities of the liver abscess is not because the child is not very septic. She's not in sepsis. And if the other possibility we thought of was cholecystitis and
cholelithiasis. You mentioned cholelithiasis.
Yes, sir. But the type of pain also could not be specified. Like there is no actual colicky pain, sir.
No, but you described the pain as colicky pain.
Sir, the type of pain could not be specified, sir, by the child.
Yeah, but in your provisional diagnosis, you must also have a differential diagnosis, like I pointed out in the beginning.
Yes, sir.
Isn't it? Because you think forward. There is going to be a certain investigation which you do, which would quickly tell you whether you're dealing with a choledochal cyst or a cholelithiasis.
So in ultrasound, we can find out the cholelithiasis.
Isn't it? You will be doing that in your investigations.
Yes, sir.
So you should always present at least one differential diagnosis to whatever your provisional diagnosis is.
Yes, sir.
Isn't it?
Yes, sir.
And here you have pain abdomen, you have fever, you have jaundice. and you have no mass palpable.
Yes, sir.
So it is very reasonable for the examiner to ask you, why have you not considered cholelithiasis or choledocholithiasis?
There will be no jaundice and cholelithiasis, sir.
Why not? Choledocholithiasis? CBD stones can have?
Yes, sir. Very rare, sir.
Yeah, but it can happen, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
We are not talking of rarity and commonality. We are talking about the possibilities.
Yes, sir.
Even if something is rare, you must think about it.
Yes, sir.
Isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Go ahead.
We did the following investigations on the child.
No, so the thing is that before you start telling me the results of investigation, sir, you must tell me what is your plan of investigation.
Sir, because the child is already in pain, first I would admit the child and start her on IV fluids because she was already dehydrated with vomiting. And I'll collect.
But you didn't mention in your...
The dehydration, because she had vomiting, she will be having a loss of fluid in the body. So
yeah, no. But if you're saying that she is dehydrated, you will start fluids because she is dehydrated. Then you should tell me that she was dehydrated. There should be in the history, you would have features like decreased passage of urine, decreased urine output on examination, in palpation, skin turgor. So all those things. You shouldn't be caught off guard.
Yes, sir.
Isn't it?
Yes, sir.
So if you are going to mention these things, then you should have forethought this and mention this in the history and in the clinical examination.
Yes, sir. So I'll admit the child and I'll keep her nilper oral and and I want to give her...
I'm not asking the plan of management of treatment. I'm asking you the plan of investigation.
So we'll send blood investigations with complete blood picture.
Categorize your answer. When you are asked about investigations, there are two aspects to investigations. Yes. What are those two aspects?
So one for diagnosis and confirm the diagnosis, and other for the surgery, sir, for the anesthesia fitness.
Not for the anesthesia. You must have
general well-being of the child.
You have a set of investigations which will give you a definitive diagnosis, and then you will have a set of investigations which will support your diagnosis, or will be because of what you have diagnosed the child to be having. Isn't it?
Yes, sir. Routine investigations and specific investigations.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So, there are two ways of presenting it. One is you go systematically and list out all the investigations. Or if the examiner wants you to first ask you the investigations for a diagnosis. Because in certain cases, diagnosing the condition takes priority over finding out the other things. Right?
Yes, sir.
In other situations, you would also like to know before you actually reach a diagnosis that if immediate management is to be instituted, then what are the investigations which would tell you that this child needs immediate intervention in management, right?
Yes, sir.
So
here...
So that is particularly if you are dealing with an acute situation, like your case here.
Yes, sir.
In your case, it is an acute situation. There are some aspects of the investigations which will tell you what to do immediately and what can wait till the child is slightly better.
Yes, sir. So,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
So here, I will first, because she's in an acute phase, I will take a complete blood picture, sir, to see total leukocyte count. And I would like to look at the blood urea, serum creat, and electrolytes, depending upon her symptoms. And because the pathology is we are suspecting in the hepatobiliary tract, I would like to do a liver function test with enzymes and proteins, as well a coagulation profile.
So if I were you, I would say
sir.
that in this particular case, I have a very strong suspicion that the child has a choledochal cyst or some problem associated with the biliary passages, possibly the common bile duct.
Yes, sir.
Right. So I will first, I will need two sets of investigations. One is the diagnostic investigation, and the other would be the supportive investigations.
Yes, sir.
So while I would like to take the patient first for a screening ultrasound, before taking the child off for a screening ultrasound, I would send off certain blood investigations,
yes,
so that by the time I get the ultrasound done and reach a diagnosis, I can also expect some of the blood reports to be back from the lab.
Okay, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
So that will help you to initiate immediate treatment and also give you the diagnosis.
Yes, sir.
The ultrasound will tell you what exactly is the problem in the right upper quadrant, and the investigations will tell you whether there is an active inflammation and infection, whether the child requires intravenous fluids, and of course, antibiotics need to be started immediately.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
So it's very important for you because you must make it very obvious to the person to whom you're presenting the case that you are in full command of the situation. And you know exactly what to do and how to do, when to do, so that you will do exactly what is required for the child.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
And there's a ultrasound abdomen was done. There was gross saccular dilatation of the common hepatic duct and proximal common bile duct, which was 2.5 into 3 centimeter. There was pericystic collection noted, and mild intrahepatic biliary dilatation was also noted. The cystic duct and gallbladder were normal. Pancreas divisum was noted, and they provisionally gave the diagnosis type 1B choledochal cyst with cholangitis pictures. The child was following this. The child was stabilized. She was on nilperoral IV fluids and symptomatic management with the antibiotics. Cephalosporins were given, and we gave her antiemetics, ondansetron, and for pain we gave her analgesics, paracetamol. After her pain subsided, we discharged the child on oral medication. The child came to us after 8 weeks, and then we.
No. Let's not. Let's stay to with the ultrasound.
Yes, sir.
Go back to the previous slide. We'll come to the other imaging investigation later on.
Yes.
Now, you said that you have a saccular dilatation.
Yes, sir.
What do you understand by saccular dilatation, and what do you understand by fusiform dilatation?
Yes.
In the overall management of the child, it probably doesn't matter. But we are doing an exercise, and therefore I'm asking you this question.
So fusiform, there will be bulge on both sides, sir, and saccular on one side. It's according to the shape and shape of the cyst, sir. Fusiform will bulge on all the sides, sir, and saccular will be on only one side, sir.
So suppose I say that you don't see a saccular dilatation or a fusiform dilatation, but you only see a mild dilatation of the common bile duct.
Sir.
Would you still think of your diagnosis, or would you like to change your diagnosis?
I would.
Or would you like to look for something more then?
I would still look further, sir, because there are some entities where there will be mild dilatation of the biliary tract, but they are supposed to be considered as choledochal cysts, like in formifrostic choledochal cysts, sir.
Okay, good.
Where there will be a pancreatic biliary maljunction. So,
okay,
I will like to proceed with the next investigation in such case.
Okay. Now, you mentioned about pancreas divisum. Does that really matter?
Not here, sir.
Why?
Sir, it is not causing any obstruction, sir.
Okay. What else would you have looked for in the ultrasound?
I look for a pancreatic duct, sir.
That you've seen the divisum.
Yes.
So you've seen the ducts. That's why you're saying that there is divisum.
Yes, sir. I mean, there's no dilatation, sir, as such.
But what else? What else?
I would look for the liver.
What about the pancreas itself?
Pancreas were normal, sir. I didn't.
So you must mention that, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Why?
Yes, pancreas, if there is any pancreatitis, they can be.
So we'll discuss that later, but you must remember that you must always look at the pancreas very carefully whenever you are dealing with a CBD pathology or a hepatobiliary pathology. Okay, we'll discuss that later on when we come to the discussion part. Carry on.
Following the 2 months, when she came back for follow-up, we did an MRCP, and this was the image secured. We can see there is dilatation of the common hepatic duct and the common bile duct, and the distal part of the common bile duct being a vein, a thread-like.
So is it necessary to do an MRCP?
Sir, because there are, yes, sir, we need a correct anatomical delineation before proceeding, sir. For the surgical procedure, we need a correct anatomical delineation. So we would go with the MRCP, sir.
But you can get how would it alter or change your management strategy?
MRCP would give us the anatomy of the extrahepatic and intrahepatic biliary tree, sir. It would tell us about what is the status of the distal CBD, if there is any pancreatico-biliary maljunction or junction, or where is it. We can even find out if there's any filling defect in the common bile duct. It gives an overall picture of the all the anatomies as well the accessory ducts if they persist, if they are present.
So a lot of people would say that as far as they are concerned, the ultrasound is good enough and they would treat the child without doing any more investigation. Would you agree with that? Or would you think that that is possible, and would you agree with that?
I would, with the investigations coming so far, I would still go ahead with MRCP, sir.
Well, you have to give me more strong justification for that.
I wouldn't want to miss out.
Ideally, as far as treatment goes, what is the treatment for a choledochal cyst?
It varies with the type of the choledochal cyst, sir. So,
for example?
Standard.
Yeah.
Tell the type.
It is, sir, our standard procedure is cyst excision with hepaticoenterostomy, sir. It is done in type 1 and 4. And in type 2, we will excise the cyst and repair the common bile duct. In type 3, we'll do a...
Will you?
Sir.
Will you?
Sir?
Will you really do that? Excise the cyst and repair the repair the CBD?
Sir, in type 2, that's what given. I have not seen type 2. Sir.
Yeah.
It's a very rare. Type 1 is most common, sir. So, type 3, we will be doing a sphincterotomy, sir, endoscopic. And the type 5, if at all it involves a segment of the liver, we will be going for a segmentectomy, sir. Or if it involves multiple segments, we will have to proceed with liver transplantation is the answer for it.
Yeah, so that is where the value of the MRCP comes in over the ultrasound, because the intrahepatic pathology can be delineated more accurately by an MRCP than with just an ultrasound.
Got it. Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
So you must, everything which you do, you must justify it.
Sir.
In the run-of-the-mill case, it probably is not necessary. But in terms of but there are certain features which the MRCP will give you much better information than an ultrasound. First, of course, you mentioned the intrahepatic pathology. And the second is information on the choledochopancreatic junction.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
Why is that required? Because if the junction is abnormal, you could also have problems with pancreatitis.
Yes, sir.
Isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. But still remember, there are lots of people who would not do anything beyond an ultrasound.
Yes, sir.
There are lots of people who will ask you whether hepatobiliary scintigraphy is required or not required. So what would be your view on that?
We do it at the...
Are you doing regularly or not?
We don't do it, sir.
We don't do it.
Yes,
yeah. So let us discuss that. What information does hepatobiliary scan do? Or let's say the HIDA scan, which is more commonly terminology-wise. What exact information does it give you?
It actually gives us if at all their patent duct is present or not, sir. If at all the dye is coming.
So,
uptake is taken.
Yeah. So there are two aspects to the hepatobiliary scintigraphy. It gives you information on hepatocyte function.
Yes, sir.
And it gives you information on bile flow.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
So there are so the hepatobiliary function, is it necessary to know? Particularly in the light of the liver function test that you have done.
Yes, sir. They give us a way to find out the liver hepatocyte function, sir. If there is any hepatocyte injury, the ALT and AST enzymes get elevated, sir. Similarly, if at all there is any...
And what else? The enzymes. There's one more enzyme.
Sir, if biliary pathology is involved, GGT and ALP are involved, sir.
Yeah. So ALP is difficult to sort of rely on in growing children because it is elevated anyways.
Yes, sir.
Right? But GGT is important. GGT gives you a definite information about not just biliary damage, but also about hepatocyte damage.
Yes, sir.
And if the enzymes are normal and if the GGT is abnormally high, I would like to do a hepatobiliary scintigraphy.
Yes, sir.
But if the liver function is relatively normal and on ultrasound the hepatic parenchyma looks normal, then you needn't do hepatobiliary scintigraphy. Right?
Yes, sir.
Because if the child is jaundiced, you know that the jaundice will be because of the, particularly if the ultrasound has shown a choledochal cyst-like picture.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
Now, staying back on the ultrasound, what can be a confusing picture? What can lead to a confusing picture? You can see a normal distal common bile duct, a dilated proximal common bile duct, dilatation extending into the distal, into the hepatic ducts. Can something produce that kind of a picture?
Any obstruction present in CBD, sir?
Yeah. So, what kind of obstruction? Which would give rise to a clinical picture like your patient has?
Any biliary stricture, sir?
Biliary stricture, yes. What else?
Sclerosing.
Isn't it?
Yes, sir.
So you are looking at a primary obstruction. A pathology would be an obstruction to the CBD.
Yes, sir.
The obstruction to the CBD can be because of a stricture, can be because of a stone,
Yes, sir.
So that can also give rise to proximal dilatation, which can confuse with a or in the ultrasound, for example. So that is again one of the reasons why you might want to do an MRCP if the ultrasound picture is confusing.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes.
But in your case, for example, the way the dilatation of the CBD is, you would probably, at least I would probably not want to do an MRCP.
In the acute phase, sir?
Even otherwise.
Okay, sir.
So the thing is that if you are not doing an MRCP and you have the ultrasound, what are the other investigations which can be done? And what are the, whether you would or whether you wouldn't? Oh, I think we have to be quick.
Sir, before...
role of an ERCP.
Sir, ERCP is not done, sir, because because of the infection rates, and the child is already in a cholangitis picture. So we will...
Invasive procedure.
It's invasive procedure, and child is already in inflammatory stage, so we wouldn't...
So you must be very careful, because I have seen a lot of children, slightly older children, who have first visited a gastroenterologist and have come with an ERCP picture.
So,
and I distinctly remember that we lost one older child because of the cholangitis, which was caused by the ERCP.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So even if it is done, it is not done in the acute phase. It can be done as an elective procedure.
Yes, sir.
But it is not necessary.
Yes, sir.
And why is it not necessary?
Because we have a lesser, we have a better investigation, sir. There is a non-invasive.
Yeah. And you have the option of doing, to get the same information, what option do you have as a surgeon?
Intraoperative cholangiogram.
Operative cholangiogram.
Yes, sir.
Isn't it? So all these things you have to keep in mind when you are planning your investigation.
Yes, sir.
Right. So anything else that you would like to do?
After MRCP, no, sir. MRCP, I would rely on MRCP.
Okay. Okay, carry on.
The child is being admitted right now for follow-up, sir. So we're planning to operate on this child, sir.
No, so you don't say follow-up.
Yes, sir. She has been admitted for...
You would follow up after the treatment has been done.
Yes, sir.
You have only treated the cholangitis. You have not treated the chorilocal cyst.
Yes, sir.
So it is not a follow-up case.
Yes, sir.
So you would now say that the child has now been admitted for definitive treatment.
Yes, sir.
Not for follow-up.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So how do you now go about it?
I'll prepare the patient for the surgery, sir.
So one second. I wanted to ask you a question at that time, but we moved on. We were talking about the value of liver function tests.
Yes,
and you were talking about hepatocyte function. And you mentioned some enzymes.
Yes, sir.
What else? What else would tell you about hepatocyte function?
The coagulation profile, sir.
Well, be specific.
We'll look for prothrombin time, sir.
Synthetic
functions. What are the two synthetic functions that you look for in LFT? One is it is now what they now call is an INR. Prothrombin time is slightly outdated. INR is supposed to be more accurate. What is INR?
International normalized ratio, sir.
Okay. So what is the other investigation apart from INR, which tells you about synthetic function?
APTT, activated partial thromboplastin.
No. Synthetic function. Something which is manufactured in the liver. Albumin.
Albumin, sir. Albumin.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So what happens to serum albumin?
It will decrease, sir.
If the hepatocytes are not functioning optimally.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. What else? This is something which has come up new, which is again a part of ultrasound, or maybe a slightly modified version of an ultrasound. Shockwave elastography, or something which is known as the FibroScan.
FibroScan.
Okay, sir.
Have you heard of that?
No, sir.
Yeah, that is something which you must read about, because that is something which is done to look at the changes in the liver.
Yes, sir.
And the shockwave elastography, or the FibroScan, looks at the degree of fibrosis inside the liver. Right?
Yes, sir.
And particularly in a situation like your patient, where there have been recurrent episodes of cholangitis,
yes, sir.
You know, that is something which you must keep in mind. It's not something which you must do now, but it is something which you must keep in mind to do at a later stage.
Yes, sir. Definitely.
Okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Right. So you have the patient admitted. Now, what do you know? How do you proceed?
Sir, I would prepare the patient and prepare the parents, sir. First, I would prepare the patient with investigations for the nutritional status of the child, for the fit and for the anesthetic purpose, sir.
Okay.
And I prepare the parents by explaining them about the procedure and getting a consent from them. And
what are you going to tell the parents about the procedure?
Sir, I'll be explaining them that the cyst excision, but the possibility of complete cyst excision will be.
Why possibility?
Yes, sir.
Why possibility? That is something which you need to do.
Because the child has gone through a inflammatory stage, sir.
So
it's not always possible to remove the cyst completely, sir. If at all there is any dense adhesions, chances of injury to the surrounding viscera and organs are more. We would not do a complete cyst excision, sir. So
what will you do then?
So we will be doing the mucosectomy, the release procedure, sir.
Okay.
We'll be removing the mucosal mucosal layer, and we will stripping the mucosal layer, sir.
Okay.
And
that is a possibility.
Yes,
what if the parents say that they don't want an open surgery?
I would we can even do it in a laparoscopic procedure, sir.
Yeah. So, yeah.
And I would explain them even about the complications which can occur after, post-op complications which can occur, sir, after
cyst excision or partial cyst excision with mucosectomy is one part of the operation.
Yes,
what else do you need to tell the parents about this?
Yes, sir. So we will be doing an anastomosis of the intestine to the hepatic duct. So the proximal part of the common bile duct. So we will explain them regarding it, sir.
Yeah.
And we will explain them about the intra-op procedure. After that, we will be explaining about the post-op period, sir. And post-op complications which can occur, the immediate as well, the late post-op complications. So if they have agreed to the all said above, we will proceed with the surgeries.
Okay. Fine. So for what are the anticipated complications following surgery or during surgery?
So during surgery, we'll try at max to not to injure any of the structures, sir. But if at all there are any aberrant vessels or there are any anomalies of the arteries or the ducts, there is a possibility of injury, sir. There's a possibility of a leak later. And if at all an artery, aberrant artery is found and it was missed, there will be excessive bleeding, sir.
So what do you actually look out for when you are doing the surgery? What is the most common? I mean, it's not very common, but amongst the rarer things, it is probably a more common thing which can happen and which can get missed.
Intraoperative, sir?
Intraoperative, yes. So I'll give you a hint. It's an aberrant duct.
Yes, sir.
It's an aberrant duct.
Yes, sir.
So what is that?
Accessory.
CBD, sir.
Not CBD.
Accessory ducts.
Axillary duct of Lashka is one.
Yes, the right hepatic duct can be an accessory or can be ectopic, right? It can open directly into the gallbladder also.
Yes, sir.
So if you miss it, you will have a persistent bile leak in the post-operative period.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So the thing is that what are the things what is that one thing which you must do in the surgery which will help you decide or which will help you in minimizing these kinds of problems? I'm referring to the operative cholangiogram.
Sir.
Would you do that or would you not do that?
Sir, if we don't do it, sir, here.
Yeah. So, I mean, one reason for not doing an operative cholangiogram, and I think the most common one is that you don't have facility for an operative cholangiogram.
It's not an institutional policy here, sir.
Okay. But like I said, I mean, instead of doing an MRCP, if you have facilities for an operative cholangiogram, I think that's the best thing to do.
On the table.
On the table.
Yes, sir.
Right? So if you do a good operative cholangiogram, you'll get to know everything that is happening in your patient.
Sir.
You'll get to know the intrahepatic duct dilatation. You will get to know any accessory duct. You will also get to have information about the choledochopancreatic junction.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
And if there are any calculi anywhere in the biliary tract, you'll get all this information in the operative cholangiogram. So most surgeons would, I mean, at least that I know of, would possibly not do an MRCP, but would rely more on the operative cholangiogram.
Okay, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So now, what are the pros and cons for doing a bilioenteric anastomosis, different kinds of bilioenteric anastomosis?
So we can do a hepatico-duodenostomy or a hepatico-jejunostomy.
Before that, what is the proximal extent of the excision of the cyst and the CBD?
So sorry, sir.
What will be the proximal extent of resection?
So we will be resecting until the junction of the common hepatic duct, sir, with the the CBD, sir, where the hepatic duct will join the common hepatic duct below it, sir.
Okay.
That is a CBD, sir. But here, because it is the common hepatic duct is also involved, we will be going ahead with where the common hepatic duct bifurcates the right and left, we will be dissecting until there, sir.
Yeah. So you see, the thing is that as far as the dilatation of the common hepatic duct is concerned,
so
it is usually part of the proximal dilatation of the hepatic ducts, right? So, I mean, the right and the left hepatic duct may also be dilated. You won't go and excise them.
Yes, sir.
So the proximal resection is restricted to the junction of the right and left hepatic ducts.
Yes, sir.
So you have to carry on your resection right up till that point.
Yes, sir.
And why do you want to do it, keep it there, and why not go proximally? More proximal? Suppose the ducts are joining together much lower down extrahepatically.
You mean up to the portal plate, you're saying, sir?
What is technical problem?
You'll create a problem for yourself.
Sir, more chances of vascular injury and as well
anastomosis. You see, instead of doing one anastomosis, you will be doing two anastomosis.
Yes, sir.
Or you will be anastomosing the duct to the duct and then doing an anastomosis. Right? So you're complicating your own life as a surgeon.
Yes, sir.
Why do you want to do that? That is why the dissection is limited to the junction of the right and left hepatic ducts, so that you can make one very nice wide anastomosis. Okay?
Yes, sir.
So this part of the anastomosis, you're making to either a Roux-en-Y loop or to the duodenum.
So.
Okay?
Yes,
so you are doing either a hepatico-duodenostomy or a hepatico-jejunostomy Roux-en-Y.
Yes, sir.
These are the two standard procedures which are being followed.
Yes, sir.
Now, what is your view on both these procedures?
Sir, when we do a hepatico-duodenostomy, there will be a duodenogastric reflux will be present, sir. Retrograde, the reflux will be there, and stricture formation is more. This can be avoided when hepatico-jejunostomy is done, sir, with the Roux-en-Y.
Okay. So, you see, the thing is that you must understand here. If your examiner is someone who does the laparoscopic choledochocyst treatment, they will most of them prefer to do a choledochoduodenostomy.
Sir.
Right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And standard procedure before laparoscopic treatment was hepatico-jejunostomy Roux-en-Y.
Sir.
Prior to that, hepatico-duodenostomy as an open procedure was also done.
Sir.
But it was given up because there was a higher incidence of post-operative cholangitis.
Yes, sir.
That risk remains even today with laparoscopic procedures. Now, most laparoscopists would believe that it doesn't happen, and therefore they do it.
Sir.
But but you must understand this, that there is no long-term data. And I think most laparoscopists have not presented the data or documented the data on post-operative complications. So they wave off this complication as non-existent. But you must remember that it does happen.
Sure.
So the safer procedure is a hepatico-jejunostomy Roux-en-Y.
Sure.
You can also do that laparoscopically. It takes a little more time than doing a hepatico-duodenostomy. But technically and theoretically, that is a much better procedure and a safer procedure for long-term prognosis.
Yeah, that's
okay.
Yes, sir.
Now, technically, the proximal anastomosis, the bilioenteric anastomosis, would you do it to the end-to-end anastomosis with the jejunal loop, or would you do an end-to-side anastomosis with the jejunal loop?
We do a end-to-side anastomosis, sir.
What is the problem with that?
Sir, there will be no traction, sir. There will be no traction of the mesentery.
What are the advantages and disadvantages? Let me put it that way.
Sir, with the end-to-side anastomosis, there will be no traction of mesentery. There will be no disparity between the lumen size. And the vascular injury is less. I mean, ischemia is less. And
want to do any endoscope later?
Sir, so when we fix the end to the near the umbilicus, sir, in the future, whenever we want to do a choledocoscope, we can use the end of the jejunum also, sir, later.
What is the disadvantage of an end-to-side anastomosis? There's quite a bit of information available now. And that is why a lot of people have shifted to to doing an end-to-end anastomosis between the duct and the jejunum.
So,
Any blind loop?
yes, sir. Actually, when there is more segment left out, there can be a blind loop, sir.
Yeah.
Because of the injury.
Yeah. So that is one of the disadvantages of doing an end-to-side anastomosis.
So,
on the other hand, you don't have restrictions on the size of the anastomosis, because on the side of the jejunum you can make as large an incision as you want.
yes, sir.
The lumen of the jejunum will restrict the size, particularly in situations where the dilatation of the duct is very huge.
So,
right?
yes, sir.
Then the other technical issue is the anastomosis between the duct and the jejunum. Would you like to do with a continuous stitch, or would you like to do with an interrupted stitch?
With the duct and the jejunum, sir?
Yeah.
Sir, we would do a intermittent one, sir.
Again, there are two views on this. There are people who do with interrupted stitches. The biggest problem with interrupted stitches is that it takes a huge amount of time,
yes,
and you spend a huge amount of suture material. So a lot of people have started doing a continuous stitch anastomosis between the duct and the jejunum, and nothing really happens to that. I mean, my preferred stitching method was a continuous stitch.
Sir.
But both are practiced equally. Both have their advantages and disadvantages, right?
Yes, sir.
And there is no significant problem if you're doing a continuous anastomosis.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So now you've done the anastomosis. Would you like to drain the subhepatic space?
Yes, sir. We will place a drain, sir. We'll place a drain and for the post-op for post-op follow-up check.
Okay. Now, suppose on the second post-operative day, you find a lot of bile coming out of the duct, of the drain sides.
Yes, sir.
So what will you think of, and what will you do?
Sir, we will check for the amount of bile, sir, which is coming out, and we would see if at all there is any blockage of the drain tube also.
Does it matter? Will it matter whether it's a large amount or small amount? The point is that bile is coming out.
Yes, sir.
What does it tell you?
That it is there is a distal obstruction which is persisting, or there is a disruption of the anastomosis.
Yes, or
accessory duct.
We have missed out any accessory duct. Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's why we asked you that question before.
Yes,
Okay, so this is something which will happen. Now, how would you manage such a case?
Sir, if at all it is
let me ask you this question in another form. What will make you decide whether to give a trial of conservative treatment or whether to take the child back to theatre?
Sir, if the output of the leak is less and it is decreasing, we will wait, sir. If at all there's a progressing output, we would take the child to the theatre for the relook, sir.
What else before that? One you said is the amount of bile. Okay, that gives you some idea. What else will tell you that whether bile is all of it is coming out or some of it is not coming out?
Sir, stools color. If the stools are yellowish, we can there is bile coming through the GIT, sir. There is not a complete obstruction. If it is ecolic, that means the bile is not draining, sir, into the GIT.
So how long will you, suppose you say that, okay, fine, let me give a trial of conservative treatment. How long would you like to give a trial of conservative treatment? At what point of time will you say that no, conservative treatment is not working, I must go in? Or will you like to do something before that to decide that?
So I would wait for 1 week, sir. And we'll do an ultrasound, sir.
So what will ultrasound tell you?
Any clinical findings?
Clinically, if the child is stable, if his vitals are stable, I would manage conservatively, sir. And
why will you expect an unstable clinical findings?
Sir, because of the derangement of, because there is a lot of bile which is leaking and it will cause peritonitis, sir. It will be a sepsis for the child.
Yeah,
it will lead to biliary peritonitis, so the child will not be stable, sir.
More than peritonitis, what are you worried more about? I mean, it's very unlikely that the child will have peritonitis. But what is more likely the problem?
As the bile keeps internally, it keeps draining, sir. It will cause more adhesions, and it will the partially disrupted anastomosis. It will completely disrupt it, sir.
Would you like to do an ultrasound in this patient? If suppose you see bile coming out from the drain?
Ultrasound we can do for the for seeing if this peritonitis, sir.
Not peritonitis. Again, I give you a hint. What is more likely? You look for a subhepatic collection.
Yes, sir.
Local.
Isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Local collection.
Yes, sir.
Now, it's quite possible that you have a subhepatic collection,
sir.
And not all the bile is coming out from the drain side.
Yes, sir.
That can get infected and can give rise to a subhepatic abscess formation.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
Now, is there any investigation other than ultrasound which can be of some help?
Any radioisotope study?
He does scan, sir.
Yeah. So suppose I say I'd like to do a HIDA scan.
Sir.
What do you think I would be wanting to look for in the HIDA scan?
We'll see for the drainage into the GIT, sir, if at all it is draining well, and if there is any duct which is leading into the draining bile into the peritoneum, sir, for the leak.
Mm-hmm. So obviously there will be some extra luminal leak of the radioisotope, because that's why the bile is coming out.
Sir, if the bile is coming into the GIT, that means, and there is a other accessory duct, sir, which is causing it. So
you can actually ask your nuclear medicine colleagues to put the child under a gamma camera and gamma counter and look at how much bile is going into the gut and how much bile is not coming out of the drain.
Sir.
Okay?
Sir.
That might help you to some extent in making a plea for early intervention. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, right. So now I think we've gone much beyond time. Let me just ask you one or two questions about the post-operative course.
You can go ahead, sir. No, time is not a limit.
Okay. So you have treated this child. There have been no complications, and you have been able to discharge this child.
Sir.
Now, what happens next? I mean, do you tell the parents that I have done whatever I had to do? I don't want to see your child again?
No, sir.
Or would you like to call the child back and do something more?
Sir, the child would be kept on regular follow-up, sir. And we will discharge the child with antibiotics. We'll give them cholerective and fat-soluble vitamins. And we'll ask them to come first.
But why? Why do you want to give fat-soluble vitamins? You already corrected the bile flow.
Yes, sir. But the already deranged part which is there, the liver function tests are deranged. So it will take time for it to set in. So until then, as for maintenance, we will give it.
Okay.
And we will ask the child to come for the initial follow-up after 2 weeks, sir. And after that, we will repeat an ultrasound and at 3 months, and HIDA scan, we do it at 6 months.
So suppose that you are in Hyderabad and suppose the child has come to you from Rajasthan.
Sir.
Would you like the child to come back after 2 weeks? It's an expense. The child will come along with the parents.
Sir.
They'll have to spend 3 tickets on the train, and they'll have to figure a place to live in Hyderabad for 2-3 days.
Sir.
Would you want the family to do that? What else can you do?
So if the child is come from far off place, we will we'll do for a general checkup, sir, as well for removing the sutures, sir. So
what I'm trying to ask you is, can you tell the child to get some things done from wherever the child has come?
Yes, sir.
And come to you only for specific if there is a specific problem.
Yes, sir. We can
say what are those things?
So I would ask them to first. I will tell the patient regarding the patients the parents about the chances of cholangitis infection, how it would present, sir, and that the chances of infection persists even after the surgery. And I will ask them to look for keep looking if there's any yellowish discoloration again, and color of the urine and the stools. And I would ask them to check, do an investigation of liver function test and ultrasound at 3 months, and HIDA scan at 6 months.
Synthetic function, liver.
Why do you want to do an HIDA scan if the child is not having any problems? I'll ask you another question depending on your answer.
Yes, sir. Actually, ultrasound is more than
when would you like to do an imaging investigation or a functional investigation?
Sir, ultrasound we would do for seeing the resolution, sir, of the collection.
Anatomy.
So you may want to look at the resolution of the intrahepatic duct caliber.
Yes, sir.
If the proximal ducts are dilated, you may want to see that. Although it doesn't matter whether they come back to normal size or they don't come back to normal size. What would matter is if the duct dilatation was
including intrahepatic, sir.
No, intrahepatic. I mean, obviously, there's no more extrahepatic duct. No? You've excised all that. You are only interested in the post-operative period. You are only interested in the intrahepatic.
Yes, sir.
So, what are the things that can happen to the intrahepatic ducts in the post-operative period?
They can be fibrosis, sir.
So, the duct may remain dilated. That's not the issue. The kind of dilatation which you're looking at or which you're wanting to look at is what matters.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
So if there is segmental dilatation which is remaining, or there is a stricture formation, or there is a saccular dilatation. These are the things which you want to look in the post-operative ultrasound scan.
Sure.
Because what does that imply then?
That it is if they reappear, sir, or
if you find these abnormal findings on the ultrasound scan,
sir.
If you actually find them, then I would like to do an MRCP to confirm that. And if the MRCP also confirms that, what would you tell your patient to be on the lookout for? There are higher chances of cholangitis.
Sir.
There are higher chances of intrahepatic calculi.
Yes, sir.
There are higher chances of microabscesses. Right?
Yes, sir.
So these are the kind of things which matter in the post-operative period. Now, suppose the child has gone home, the child has been absolutely fine, The child came back to see you after a year. There was nothing, no problem. But the child goes back and about 1.5 years or 2 years later reports that the child is having jaundice again with pain and possibly fever. What will you think of and what will you do?
Anastomosis.
We'll try to.
Patients.
We think of doing we'll see for a choledocoscope, sir. We will call the child.
Choledocoscope. It's a very invasive procedure. Why do you want to do it?
We want.
What else can you do?
Can I do simple ultrasound and see dilatation?
Yes, sir. If there's any obstruction, any other distal obstruction which has caused this jaundice, we can see through the ultrasound, sir.
Yeah, so you must remember what I was trying to ask you was that sometimes there is a rule loop stasis.
Sir.
This is something which is very commonly neglected and most people don't even think about it. So, but this is something which you must keep in mind, that if the child has been absolutely fine for a period of time and then has recurrence of symptoms, you must think of a rule loop stasis also.
Okay.
And the best way of diagnosing a rule loop stasis is to do a HIDA scan.
Sir.
If there is a rule loop stasis, the HIDA scan will show you stasis of the radioisotope in the rule loop.
Sir.
And that can happen because of?
Longer segment left out.
No, because of adhesions. Usually because of adhesions.
Sir.
If the vascularity is normal, you would not think of a stricture formation in the jejunum, but there could certainly be adhesions in the rule loop.
Sir.
Right? And if that is happening, then you might have to intervene to do an adhesiolysis and straighten out the rule loop.
Yes, sir.
Okay?
Yes.
Right. Now, if there's any question which you want to ask me.
There are some questions put in the chat box, sir.
Okay. Let me have a look at that.
Yeah.
Okay, so there is a question, when is it called as major or minor biliary leak? Is it amount or related with duration? For the amount, any calculations for per kg body weight? Would you like to answer that?
Sir, we usually measure it with the gauze, sir. If there is 1 or 2 gauze soakage, it is considered low output, sir.
So this is where the question comes in, what kind of drain would you like to put in?
Sir.
If you put a corrugated red rubber drain or something like that, there is no way that you can measure the amount. You know, every measurement would be a rough measurement. But if you have a tube drain,
sir,
you can actually measure the amount.
Sir.
Right?
Yes.
And the importance of that is you get an objective picture over a period of time about whether the drain is the same, whether the drain is more, or whether the drain is becoming less.
Sir.
Right?
Yes.
So that is an advantage of putting a tube drain following surgery for choledochal cyst.
Sir.
I am not aware of any calculation regarding body weight in relation to the amount of bile leak.
Sir.
But I think it is something which requires clinical judgment and which requires observation over a period of time. Okay?
Yes, sir.
And the only thing which you must remember is that if you have to intervene, it's better to intervene early than to intervene late.
Yes, sir.
Because if you intervene later, there will be much more fibrosis in the region of the porta hepatis. And the dissection around the area of the previous anastomosis can become very difficult.
Yes, sir.
So I think within a week, you must take a decision whether you want to go in again or whether you don't want to go in again.
Yes, sir.
Okay?
Yes, sir.
The next one is the chat box.
Sorry?
The next question in the chat box, sir.
Yeah.
In
So
exam, should we classify the choledochal malformations according to modified Todani classification or according to King's classification by Devonport? Dr. Vijay Raghavan.
So would you like to tell us what are these modifications?
Sir, modified Todani classification is the one we are following, sir, where it is divided into the 5 types, and the one which I mentioned before, sir. Type 1A is cystic dilatation of the entire common bile duct. 1B, cystic dilatation of a segment of the common bile duct. 1C being the fusiform dilatation of the CBD. Type 2 is the diverticulum of the CBD with no dilatation of the CBD. There is no dilatation either of the extra or intrahepatic ducts. Type 3 is the choledococele, where there will be a normal common bile duct and a main pancreatic duct, but there will be a cystic dilatation at the distal CBD. That can be either intraduodenal or intrapancreatic. Type 4 is multiple cis. Type 4A is multiple cis intrahepatic and extrahepatic, and 4B is multiple cis extrahepatic. Type 5 is single or multiple intrahepatic cysts without extrahepatic duct dilatation. When this is associated with periportal fibrosis, it is called Carolese.
And where do you fit in the Formifrasti variety? So the modifications have come because Formifrasti is now included as part of the classification of choledochal cyst. Right? Mark Devonport does not call it choledochal cyst. He calls it congenital dilatation of the bile duct. Right?
Yes, sir.
And one more modification has then come up is the isolated dilatation of the common hepatic duct.
Sir.
Right? So these are essentially the various classifications of choledochal cyst. Now, the thing is that whether you should mention that in your diagnosis of choledochal cyst, yes, of course you have to, because there are different kinds of choledochal cysts would require different kinds of treatment. For example, the choledococele would not require excision of the common bile duct and bilioenteric anastomosis. It will require intervention only at the site of the ampulla.
Yes, sir.
Which can be done by endoscopy. You don't even need to operate on that.
Yes, sir.
Right? Carolese disease would not merit resection of the extrahepatic duct with hepatococcygeostomy. If you are certain about Carolese disease, then that patient is a candidate for a liver transplantation.
Yes.
So it is different kinds of choledochal cysts would demand different kinds of treatment, and therefore you must be able to fit your case into a particular kind of choledochal cyst.
Yes.
Okay.
So next in the chat box, sir. Follow-up, is there a protocol and how long? Dr. Ramesh Kumar.
Right. So it's very clear. I mean, I think we have to look at what is ideal and what is not ideal. And ideal would be frequent follow-up in the first 1 year of the post-operative period. It may not be ideal for people who cannot afford to come back to you again and again. And that is why we discussed about what should be your post-operative advice to the patient at the time of discharge. If the patient can come to the hospital, I would like the child to come at 3 months, 6 months, and 1 year. If the child cannot afford to come, then I would ask the child to come maybe once after the year. But in the meantime, the child will have to be under supervision of somebody locally, and with the measures that we have discussed. And in today's day and time, it is not always necessary for the patient to come, because there can be lots of things which can be transmitted digitally, and which the treating surgeons can see and advise the patient on WhatsApp or email or whichever way is possible. So these are things which are now becoming more and more modifiable, and I think you must choose the best method of keeping a communication with the child and the parents.
There
Right?
is a point made by Dr. Bikash Naredi, sir, from JIPMER.
Yeah.
So if there is a leak, to take a decision whether to intervene or not, quantification of the leak by HIDA scan is a good option. Your comment?
I don't know. I'm not sure whether a HIDA scan is good enough for quantifying the biliary leak. At best, the biliary scan can only tell you whether there is a leak or not, and whether there is stasis or not, and whether there is a subhepatic collection or not, and the amount of bile which is going into the Roux loop versus the bile which is coming out in the drain, and that is possible only by the gamma counter. So depending on these measures, you have to take a decision.
Dr. Akshita Unni, how many days we can wait in case of bile leaks, sir?
That we discussed. I think a 1 week period is a good enough period, and if during that 1 year period, if you can show either a decreasing trend or something which suggests that it can be managed conservatively. Otherwise, if the drainage output is as high as it was on day 1, or if it has become higher, and a HIDA scan does not show radioactivity in the Roux loop, then I think you just take the child back to theater and redo the anastomosis.
We have to intervene early.
Yeah.
There is a good pat from Dr. Meera Luthra, sir.
Yeah.
Viresh, a real treat to see you walking the presenter step by step.
Well, I think along with the presenters, it has also become a nice, good practice for us, because we've done this exercise day in, day out with our postgraduates. So, and I think, it's much more enjoyable to figure out a case when you go step by step and logically. Like I said in the beginning, it's like an investigation of a police case, for example. So it becomes enjoyable if you do it systematically and step by step.
It's a two-way learning.
Yes, certainly.
Dr. Suman, is there any role of tube cholecystostomy or ERCP-guided stenting while managing the patient with choledochal cyst with severe cholangitis?
Yeah. So that is a good question. And I think if that is possible, it can be attempted. But standard treatment for something like that would be either ultrasound-guided stenting of the gallbladder or the common bile duct itself. Now, with the intervention radiologist, you can also do a percutaneous puncture of the
PTC.
So all those possibilities are there. I think ultimately it would all depend on the functionality of these procedures, the feasibility of these procedures, and what the treating team is most comfortable with.
Dr. Aditya, sir, in a patient with choledochal cyst with obstructive jaundice and active pancreatitis, how long do we wait for surgery?
Yeah.
There is a pancreatitis.
Yeah. So here we have a reason to do something which is the minimum intervention. And that minimum intervention can be either a cholecystostomy or to put a catheter in the choledochal cyst itself, and give time to the patient to return to normalcy or as near normalcy as possible. Technically, the surgery becomes difficult because obviously there is much more inflammation and fibrosis in the region of the operating field. But in terms of patient safety, it's much better for the cholangitis and the pancreatitis to resolve before you actually end up doing a major surgery.
The point made by Dr. Prema Menon, sir.
Yeah.
It is important to tell the parents that gallbladder will also be removed during surgery.
Yes, I think that's a very good point.
Yeah.
Although we as surgeons presume that the gallbladder would be removed, but I think for the patient and the patient's parents, I think it's necessary to tell them that the gallbladder is also because of two reasons. And I think the most important reason is that they should not be, they should not come across and what should I use the word? Unscrupulous treating person who might say that, oh, no, I have to go in again and remove the gallbladder. So it's important for the patient to know that the gallbladder has also been removed.
Dr. Khyati Kiran, does ERCP have a therapeutic role in acute phase of cholangitis in a case of choledochal cyst with choledocholithiasis?
Yeah, so I think it's the same principle. I mean, we have to weigh the risks and the pros and cons of the ERCP, regardless of what the associated pathology might be. Because the problem with ERCP is, of course, we know that it has certain advantages, but we also know that it has lots of disadvantages. And particularly in very sick children, where the child is already very sick and you are going to add to an ERCP procedure, which may or may not function. On the other hand, if you take a direct approach like doing a cholecystostomy or a tube drainage, external drainage of the choledochal cyst, you can be almost 100% sure that it will benefit the patient much more than any other procedure. So it's a standard time-tested technique, which I think one should remember and persist with.
Yeah. The last one in the chat box, sir, Dr. Sai Subramaniam. CBD stone with proximal dilatation and choledochal cyst with stone. How can I differentiate clinically, investigation-wise, and in MRC? Basically, whether it is the cause or the effect of CBD dilatation.
Yeah, very difficult question. I was hoping nobody would ask that. Because quite frankly, I mean, in most situations, you should remember that if the obstruction is caused by a calculus, by a stone, the proximal dilatation is not as huge as it might be in a choledochal cyst. And here the possibility arises that we should look for whether there are calculi present in the gallbladder or not. If there are calculi in the gallbladder and there's a calculus in the CBD, one would assume that the obstruction is because of the calculus. But if it is a solitary calculus in the CBD, which is causing the obstruction, with not a very remarkable dilatation of the proximal CBD, we would say that it is CBD. The CBD is causing the obstruction and the minor proximal dilatation. Thirdly, calculi formation in a choledochal cyst is usually multiple. So if there are multiple calculi in a dilated CBD, I would tend to put the diagnosis more in favor of a choledochal cyst with secondary calculi rather than calculi causing secondary obstruction of the CBD.
There is one more question, sir.
Yeah.
Okay. The last one.
Which is?
What should be the minimum width of CBD when a surgery can be advised in asymptomatic cases? Dr. Yoga Nagender, sir. Any role for follow-up?
Okay. Now,
This for surgery.
This is a very technical question. And if you're using magnification while operating, the size of the CBD does not matter. And we have this experience with, especially with people who do pediatric liver transplants or patients who do split liver transplants. There even very tiny ducts are anastomosed to the loop of bowel, and usually a stent is placed in them, which is in the form of a feeding tube or a ureteric catheter or anything of that kind. 4 stitches are more than enough between a small duct and the intestine. If you're not comfortable with that, you can fish mouth the CBD. So you slit it, and open it out, so that instead of 4 stitches, you can put 8, 10, 12, 16, whatever the amount of CBD you have slit. So these are technical issues, and it will all depend on what kind of experience the surgeon has. But there are ways and means of doing an anastomosis which is larger than the diameter of the CBD.
Dr. David Edison, what is your choice, sir? Choledochal duodenostomy or choledochoduodenostomy? Which is better?
I have never done. I have never done a choledochoduodenostomy, so I can't answer that question. Okay. I was. Somebody's mixie is making a noise out there.
It is too late now.
So the thing is that I was trained in the era when standard therapy for biliary enteric anastomosis was between the duct and the rule loop of jejunum. At that point of time, a choledochoduodenal anastomosis was looked down upon, and it was thought to be the cause of recurrent post-operative cholangitis, and nobody practiced it. So when I grew up in that era, my preferred choice of surgery was always a choledochoduodenoscopy. Yeah.
There is one more from Dr. Naredi, sir. After excisionary choledochal cyst, if you find an accessory hepatic duct, how do you approach that?
Well, you have to anastomose it to the loop of bowel.
If they are well apart, sir, if they are close, it's okay. If they are well apart.
Yeah, if they are well apart, you will have to do a second anastomosis between the.
If they are close.
If they are close, well, it's rarely which it is close, but if it is close, and technically it's possible to anastomose it to the existing ducts, slit it and make a larger diameter. Then you can anastomose the duct to the existing ducts and do one anastomose. Yeah. But by and large, the accessory duct is a little away from the ducts at the porta, and it's much better to do a second anastomosis for the accessory duct.
Okay. Dr. Naredi, thank you, sir, for your wonderful teaching session.
Thank you. Thank you all.